It's time for Optimum's Red Hot Sale. Get 200 meg internet, TV with over 260 channels, and unlimited home phone, all for $69.99 a month for 1 year guaranteed. And for a limited time, HBO and Showtime are included for 1 year. Switch today. Click for details and special web-only offers.
All right.
Talk shoes. Recorded live.
Well, welcome back to Travis and Blake's Drunken Horror Adventures. We don't have a Vic on the line. I think he might be dead because when I messaged him, he didn't respond. Go ahead.
He's fine. He'll show up at some point. You know, he'll send a message or something. He's not dead. We've known. Trust me.
We've got California on the call, and before I do anything else, I want to make sure who we've got on here. If you want to introduce yourself, feel free. California? Anyone? Anyone? Is this Wyndell?
Yes.
Hey, Wyndell, how you doing, sir?
Hey, calling from Washington. I use Skype, so I guess it gave me a California number.
That's what it does. So before I let you introduce yourself, I'm just going to introduce the subject at hand. Tonight we're talking about Albert Fish. People that don't know who Albert Fish is, well, Wyndell, I don't know if he considers himself an expert, but he definitely knows quite a bit about the subject. So, Wyndell, I'll let you introduce yourself and kind of give people a background on you.
Okay, you want me to do that now?
Yeah, feel free. Just go ahead and let everybody know, what your areas of study and all those things are. I mean, I've introduced you in the past from, the Crime Museum in Washington, D.C., sure. But you can give more info on yourself than obviously I can.
And thanks for the opportunity. I'm Wyndell Watkins, Deputy Chief from the Metro Police Department here in Washington, D.C. I was for 27 years, and some of this I was Deputy Chief of Police, detectives, also our federal task forces that involve the FBI called OK Squad, one called Red Rum.
I think your Skype is breaking up slightly, Wyndell. I haven't heard the last few sentences. Blake, are you hearing it, or is it just me?
Hey, there's a delay and a little.
Hey, Wyndell, is there any way you can call back on a phone line? Your Skype seems to be breaking up. I can barely hear you. Okay, try giving us a call on a normal phone line. This one's cutting out for some reason. I have no idea why. The Skype's just not doing it for some reason. I have no idea why.
I can't hear him. There's a delay, too, like a lot of echo.
Yeah, so I guess we'll wait for him to try to reconnect. That's why I have trouble with Skype personally. Whenever I try to Skype, I get delays and feedback like that, too, Blake.
Yeah, it's bad. A lot of the Nightmare Cast wanted to do Skype. I was like, I don't think it's going to work, guys.
Yeah, it's great. I think there's certain systems that are set up for Skype, and TalkShoe works with Skype, but I don't think it works great with Skype. So, Blake, I'll tell you what. While we're waiting for Wyndell to call back in, you kind of focused a lot of your studies back in the day in college and otherwise on Mr. Fish. So I'll let you kind of intro us in here.
Well, his story to start with is very interesting. The term boogeyman, when we hear it now, we think of horror films. But he was one of the first serial killers to be called the boogeyman. He was also called the werewolf of Mysteria and the gray man because of his appearance. He looked like, to quote Detective William King, who finally called him, he looked like somebody you could, leave your kids with and let them watch them and have a good time with, like somebody's grandfather. He looked totally unsuspecting, and you never know by looking at him that he was such a depraved individual.
Okay, Wyndell's back on a landline or a cell phone. And Wyndell, are you there now?
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect.
Okay.
That's great.
Perfect. We're so glad to have you back. I'm sorry about Skype. Skype does that sometimes. I have no idea. I think Skype's kind of picky about which system it's using. But let's kind of take a few steps back again. And can you reintroduce yourself again? Sorry, it was cutting out the whole time, and I don't want everybody to, miss your background.
Oh, sure. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm Wyndell Watkins. I'm a retired Deputy Chief of Police from the Metropolitan Police Department here in Washington, D.C. During my 27 years with the Metropolitan Police Department, I served as the Chief of Detectives, the Commander of Internal Affairs, the head of 3 federal task forces, one known as the Cold Case Squad that involved D.C. homicide detectives and FBI agents, one known as Red Rum that involved DEA agents and homicide detectives, and then the Violent Crime and Gang Task Force, which I worked with Eric Holder and Bob Mueller, who became infamous after they left the D.C. government. One became the head of the FBI and the other one became the Attorney General. During my 27 and a half years with the Metropolitan Police Department, we had the undubious distinction of being known as the murder capital of the world. At one point, we were dealing with as many murders as anybody in the entire world. And so we learned a lot, and one of the things I did in a book that I've written entitled You Investigate, Don't Speculate, See What You've Been Missing, is to point out some of the things that we learned, some of the tough lessons, and hopefully as I was asked to come and talk about this topic, a lot of the things as I was looking into Albert Fish, I kind of addressed in my book, and hopefully we can discuss some of those tonight.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious, too. Okay, so, you're doing the law enforcement side of it.
Yes.
You retire, so were you always interested in, historical crime, or is it something that you kind of developed an interest in after your career was over? After that career was over.
Well, it's an interesting question. It was a combination of a couple of things. One of the things as being the head of a group, especially as I came through the ranks, I was in charge of the sex offense branch, then I was in charge of the homicide branch, then I worked up to chief of detectives. During that time, we investigated a lot of cases, and one of the things that I observed was the fact that there are about 20 or 25 elements that are always present, whether you're aware of them or not, involving investigations to include criminal, administrative, and private matters. And so as I would review the cases, I would notice that I was asking the same questions over and over again. So I would make a little checklist to see if as I was reading these investigations, whether or not they were answered. And then what I found out was in the cases that were solved, that these things were always present. In the cases that were unsolved, they were not present, and they had to be reexamined. And so when I had the Cold Case Squad, we did a lot of case review and going back and looking at different things. And to my amazement, it was those things, those questions, processes that were not addressed were the things that helped to solve cases. And so I started applying that to solved and unsolved cases, no matter whether it was a case that occurred last week or 1,000 years ago. These things were always present. And when I applied it to the Albert Fish story and the things that he was involved in, once again, these things came to the forefront.
It's really interesting you say that because, people have their own little checklist on serial killers, too.
Yes.
How much of your background was on serial killers as opposed to just, typical murders? I hate to say typical, but you get my point.
Yes. Well, that was all part of the process. We were dealing with serial killers even though we were unaware of them. Because the thing that when we were the murder capital of the world, we were dealing with so many murder cases and shootings in the District of Columbia that the Army was sending their doctors to Washington, D.C. to learn how to treat gunshot wounds. So after a few thousand cases, there are certain things that you start to see, and it's kind of, like different diseases. Even though we don't discover them until later in life, they were present all along, and the same with serial killers. Albert Fish, I was not familiar with him, but I was familiar with Dahmer and Bundy and, matter of fact, Toole and a couple of other serial killers that had worked in America because the circle of homicide investigators is a kind of a small and unique circle where, we correspond with each other to see what's going on and what can we learn from each other at different conferences. So the fact that serial killers, what we found, were really no different from regular killers in that they had become more proficient. And the thing is, I was thinking about with Albert Fish, he fit right into what I had learned in that serial killers are very methodical. But again, they have certain characteristics that I'd love to share with your audience.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Before we hear that part of it, I do have to ask you a little bit about
Sure.
just you kind of learning about Albert Fish in the first place. Because okay, you talked about you knew who Dahmer was, you knew probably who Bundy was, Gacy was. Most people, I think, if you ask them on the street, they could name those people. I don't think that everybody walking down the street would know Albert Fish. So I think you were probably, despite your knowledge of all these people, about like most citizens as far as quote-unquote serial killers go, but Albert Fish, he's a little less known, but he did some heinous acts. So can you kind of talk about at what point you found out about Albert Fish and then kind of delved into him and learned more?
Well, yes. In my research of Mr. Fish, I realized that he was born in Washington D.C. and that he had a reputation, like most serial killers, as being very charming and using. He would take advantage of different situations that he would find. I think ultimately he was responsible for over 100 murders, and he even delved into cannibalism and different sexual deviant acts, and eventually he's executed in New York. But he had, I think he was known as the Boogeyman, the Great Wolf. There were a lot of things attributed to him. Like I said, he was born in D.C. in 1903, I believe. I'm sorry, in 1870, and he was executed in New York in 1936, and he was 65 years old. Part of his motivation for committing these type of crimes was sexual gratification, murder, kidnapping, grand larceny, theft. And like I said, he was a pretty notorious guy who was very treacherous and very conniving. And what you find with most serial killers, they all kind of use the same methodology, is that they try to gain your trust. And once they gain your trust and get you to drop your guard, they really become like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type of individual.
Yeah, talk about that checklist, basically. It's something that we've talked about on this show many times. We talked about it with all the different serial killers. And a lot of times, the general public thinks of serial killers as really smart people, but their IQs, when you do it historically on a curve, they're not as high. But kind of talk about the checklist and the things you look for in a serial killer.
Yes. Well, again, they come from all walks of life. It's not. You can't. The old saying, you can't judge a book by the cover. It's very true with serial killers because they come from all walks of life: the rich, the poor, the infamous, the famous, and then you have the situational or the opportunist. But they all kind of use the same technique. They try to observe whoever their victim is. They'll meet them. They'll try to appear to be very trustworthy, and again, that's the main thing that they try to do is to get you to drop your guard, and then they'll try to lure you out of your environment into an environment that they control. And once they do that, they really kind of, like I say, go from being Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde, someone you won't even understand. Once we had a case in Washington, D.C., where we were having a number of rapes in a certain part of the city, and eventually we find out that the perpetrator is a neighborhood minister. And what he would do, he would go out and meet women who were living in the streets or on hard times, and he would offer them a meal. He'd invite them to his place, and he would rape them. And he was counting on the fact that, well, who would believe them versus him? But where he made a mistake, he picked up a law student and he thought she was homeless, but she wasn't. And one of the things that I'll never forget that she said when this guy changed and started assaulting her, that she said, "How can you do this? You're a preacher." He says, "I'm a different person when I'm at home." And eventually, not only did we arrest him, but he was convicted. And that's kind of the same thing that we see with most of these serial killers. One of the things that I advise people to do is that, when it comes to relationships, whether it's business or personal, you should always